to give it about 5 or 6 seconds. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and this is YR Foundation's webinar series. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Regis O'Connor, who's joining us from Buffalo in New York State, USA. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm delighted that you're here. Just before we move on, first off, just a couple of things to the usual sort of formalities. If you're watching us on YouTube Live, please let us know where you're from. We're sort of very interested to see where everyone in the world is watching us and joining us from. And we always get a real kick out of seeing how vast and how expansive the R community is around the world. So please drop a note in the chat to sort of let us know where you're from. Also, if you have any questions, also in the same place, just put them in the YouTube chat. We'll ask them all at the end. We'll have a Q&A right at the end of the presentation. Finally, before we start, just actually thank our sponsors, Jumping Rivers. Jumping Rivers are a data science and consultancy and training company based in Newcastle in the UK. They've been great supporters of the R community, R user groups, and Saturdays and so on over the past few years. And we really appreciate their ongoing support. So I'll just let you take it away there, Regis, and we'll chat later on in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started here. There we go. Thanks for joining me today to talk about storytelling with ggplot. I'm here in Buffalo, so I would like to just show you a little bit about where it is where I live. Buffalo is here on the west side of New York State. New York City is way down here to the south. That's about a 6-hour drive, about 370 miles. And actually, we're much closer to Toronto, which is up here near this Compass Rose. That's about a 2-hour drive in non-COVID times. We can't cross the border right now. And we're very close to Niagara Falls. What makes Buffalo distinctive, however, is its location on Lake Erie. In the Industrial Revolution, Buffalo grew to be a fairly wealthy city because the Erie Canal terminus was in Buffalo, and that opened up all of the Midwestern US markets to the Eastern markets. The canal reached across New York State and down the Hudson River onto New York. This lake also makes Buffalo notorious. In the winter, the cold winds blow from Canada over Lake Erie, and especially in early winter before the lake freezes, the air condenses, or the water condenses above Lake Erie and creates lake effect snow. Now I'm going to show you this, and this will make sense later when we get to our charts. And here's a video from NOAA of a massive snowfall we had. I live up here in Buffalo, and I used to work down here. And when that lake effect snow comes in and starts moving, it turns into lake effect bands of snow. And they're very discreet. And I could have a blue sky here at home and be stuck in the deepest snowstorm at work. I'm going to show you a picture of what this looks like from a tall building in the city during one of these snowstorms. You see a very discrete line of where the condensation is, or where the snow is falling from the condensation of that lake. And like I said, this could be a blue sky here, and here it's a total snowstorm. In fact, here's a shot from the lakefront park, and during that same snowstorm, we can see the blue sky. But what happens afterwards is really interesting because Buffalonians pull together and help each other out. And this is a very common sight after a snowstorm like this. And my favorite part of this picture is this lady here who's standing with no jacket, no hat, and no gloves, and everybody's having a good time helping each other shovel out. The other surprising thing about dealing with Buffalo weather is that people develop a lot of innovative solutions for enjoying and thriving. And here's a video of a ice bike in the Buffalo Erie or Canal Park. So I wanted to share this little bit about what it's like to live and thrive in Buffalo, because thriving in Buffalo has everything to do with a spirit of universal design. And universal design, we'll talk a lot more about that in a moment, but I wanted you to sort of have a framework to reference what a metaphor of what universal design is. It involves using technology like radar. It involves paying attention to the weather, the look of the sky. It involves getting involved in your community, and you end up with some pretty cool innovation at the end. So the subtitle of my talk today is the transformative power of universal design. And we'll look at that in regard to a specific chart I made in the winter in Buffalo. As I was waiting for the spring to come, I decided to create a chart of Buffalo bike lanes and maps, or I'm sorry, and parks and neighborhoods. So this chart is a basic ggplot of Buffalo bike lanes and parks and neighborhoods. And it was the power of universal design that enabled me to turn this basic chart into one that has much more information. It is more pleasing to look at. But let's step back for a moment and review and discuss what is universal design. We'll also talk about why it matters. We'll review some techniques and tools that can help you get started with universal design immediately. And then we'll go through this case study of the ggplot map that I created of the Buffalo parks and bike trails. So what is universal design? The United States General Services Administration is the go-to agency for all purchasing contracts with the US government. The US GSA has prioritized universal design in all contracts involving information and communication technology. They've created a set of 4 videos I highly recommend. They're about 4 minutes each, and they're designed for the different roles people play in that process. Everyone from a developer to a purchasing agent to a manager and so forth. But the definition here is that universal design is about products and environments that are usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. The BBC also has a great number of resources dedicated to accessibility or accessible design. It's the same thing as universal design. And the policy distributed in 2017 states that the BBC Access Policy is about making our services accessible to disabled people, removing barriers and facilitating inclusion. So that's a high-level definition of universal design. If you would like to get into extensive detailed specifications, I recommend visiting the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is an international standard. It includes a variety of very specific recommendations. It's very long and detailed. But in general, it looks at how to make web content more accessible for people with disabilities. For example, natural information, text and sounds and so forth, and using code and markup language to import structure into the content. Basically, it tries to understand and help people realize how to make content recognizable by screen readers, making sure that the font is readable, adding headings and tags and so forth. Concepts of the key principles of universal design is it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust? In short, perceivable is referring to things like have features like alternative text been included? Is there adjustment for time-based media for people who need more time to interface with the content? And are the foregrounds and the background images and audio separated so that people can distinguish between them? Operable refers to the ability to access all functionality with a keyboard. It also looks at helping users find their way through the content, and including it includes also making sure that the content doesn't trigger seizures. The understandable platform and details are looking at, is the text readable and understandable, and does it help users avoid and correct mistakes? And finally, robust refers to, does the content maximize compatibility with user agents and screen readers currently and in the future? So those are the 4 key principles of universal design. Why does it matter? Why am I even talking about this in the ggplot exercise? Well, if we return to the GSA in the United States, the General Services Agency, they've mandated that not only are disabled persons protected from discrimination, I'm sorry, we're at the UK Equality Act of 2010, which mandates that disabled persons are protected from discrimination, and employers, colleges, venues, and service providers must make reasonable adjustments and provide support and make things accessible. So it's the law in the UK. And I believe, if I didn't, yeah, let's go forward here. And in the US, I think I have the GSA standard here. Yes, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 508, the federal government is required to procure, create, use, and maintain information and communication technology that's accessible to people with disabilities, whether they work for the US government or if they're a client. So for example, if you're coming to use the Social Security app online, you can expect to have an experience that is accessible. It's the law in the US, it's the law in the UK. And if you want to work for the US government or for a supplier who sells information and communication technology to the US, you need to provide accessible content. So it's the law, and it's certainly to your advantage to have this skill set in your portfolio. But beyond that, it's not just the law, it makes everything better. And who hasn't, seen this site of a child totally engaged with a laptop and a screen, or we've got laptops or even the tablets, which are designed intuitively and accessibly so that they can enjoy it as well. So accessible design is worth pursuing, not only because it's the law and it's good to have in your portfolio, but it just makes the whole experience better for all people, whether they need that accessibility feature or not. So what are some techniques and tools that you can get started with today to make your content accessible? To begin with, start with an outline. Whenever you're designing a web page or a dashboard or even a data viz, it's good to lay out what you really are trying to accomplish. All good data viz starts with, what are your design and communication goals and objectives? What are you really trying to elicit? What sort of behavior do you want your audience to pursue? What are the key points of interaction that you want them to engage in? And what journey and narrative structure best matches the objectives and goals you have for that interface? My favorite technique is to format consistently. And here we've got our CSS, our HTML, and our JS standards, which are incredibly powerful in helping make your content accessible. There's a lot of smart people at our studio and are making all kinds of formats and markdown that make it easy for screen readers to navigate and translate and interpret your content. Take advantage of those. Make sure you use the consistent approach to your style sheets and to your headings and to your bulleted lists. That's probably the single easiest thing to do. But use the system to do that for you, because there's a whole lot of infrastructure behind it that will enable the accessibility later on in the process. Use descriptive link language. What that means is instead of saying click here or more information, be very specific. Here's an example from the Home Office in the UK. This is from a great set of posters. Instead of saying click here, you should say what will happen when the user does click that. Contact us. Be very specific with descriptive links and headings. Tag all images with descriptive alt text. Programs like Word and even our Markdown are generating alt text, and you should check it and make sure that it is meaningful. I'll give you an example here of when it doesn't work so well. Here's an example of the cat on the left is tagged with an image or alt text that just says IMG, a bunch of numbers.png, whereas the tag on the right says cute cat. So when the screen reader reads this, it will read cute cat to a visually impaired person who's using the tag on the right. It's much more meaningful and helpful. So take the time to look through your alt text and provide some meaningful content there. And whenever possible, use clear and plain language as you title your charts and you write headings and subtitles. Here's an example again from the Home Office. On the right-hand side is an example not to pursue. This is using a complicated figure of speech of it's raining cats and dogs. Instead, the better thing is to simply say, bring an umbrella, do this, bring an umbrella. So we use plain language. And finally, my favorite is use colorblind friendly palettes. There are many tools available to help you with this. I'll show you just a couple. First is the accessibility tool at color.adobe.com. I'll show you another example of this later on, but Adobe Color has many ways to select color palettes. And once you select a color palette, you can click into the accessibility tool and see how well it performs in a colorblind situation. In this case, the tool gives me the green check mark. We're ready to go. There's no issues. If there was an issue, it would flag where the issues are, and it gives you the opportunity to toy with the colors until you get to a solution that is accessible. And then my other tool I use all the time is the color blindness simulator from Coblis. You drag up your data, your chart. I'll show you an example in a moment. And you can click through the different types of color blindness. So like red week, green week, blue week, and red blind, green blind, and blue blind, and see, does your chart still perform if you simulate what a colorblind person might see. And this is important because as many as 10% of your audience has probably got some color blindness. So we've reviewed a lot so far. We've gone through what is universal design. We've discussed why it's important. We've looked at some techniques and some tools. And now I'm going to take you through a case study of incorporating universal design in development of my ggplot2 map. So to begin with, we need to talk about what were my objectives. And I also will tell you about my inspiration. I had been following the Storytelling with Data podcast and listened to Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic interview Kenneth Field, who is a cartographer with Esri. And they were discussing mapping and the accessibility of mapping. And probably mapping is the worst example to pick to talk about in an accessibility conversation, but there are some things you can do. Maps are notoriously difficult because of the polygon shapes being so irregular and the amount of detailed labeling that's required to make a map usable. Even so, there are things you can do. You can choose colorblind palettes, and you can choose labels, and you can choose annotations and headings and so forth that do provide context that's meaningful. So I decided I wanted to use ggplot, and I wanted to experiment with 3 different types of polygon files. I wanted to work with shape files, 3 different types of shape files. I wanted to work with polygons, with lines, and with points. I decided I'd work with Buffalo Open Data because I'm familiar with Buffalo, and I'd be able to quickly see if the chart was working or if there were some problem areas. I understood the geography. I wanted to make the design as accessible as possible, and I was also looking for a story that would be interesting to share. So I went to Buffalo Open Data, and they have a great choice of some geospatial data. There's probably 4 or 5 pages of different sorts of spatial files, and I settled in on the parks and the bike lanes. I didn't mention that Buffalo is home to one of the Frederick Law Olmsted park designs. Our city is built around a network of large urban parks, and they're connected by parkways, and Frederick Law Olmsted is the designer of New York Central Park. So we have a great deal of parks in Buffalo. Not all of them are big, some of them are small, but they have grass and they have trees on them, so they're still parks. And the bike lane data is geospatial lines data, and it looks like it would be fun to think about that in the middle of the snow that we still have here in Buffalo. So to begin with, I used the first 4 packages to prepare for ingesting the data. We have, of course, dplyr to shape the data in ggplot2, but I also needed rgdal. rgdal is important for loading spatial files. And then broom is a package that's necessary to tidy up spatial polygon files. In addition, I had to add some more packages. The SPD dplyr, SP dplyr package is a package that has a function to create aggregations, and I wanted to do some aggregating of the geospatial polygons in the data. sdraw is also an aggregating data package that will aggregate linear, or I wanted to get miles of trails. And then finally, rgeos, I loaded into this analysis in order to get centroids. Centroids are ways to locate the center of the geopolygon, and it gave me a way to put meaningful labels on the charts. And as I go through this, I do want to let you know that any data visualization is an iterative process. So I'm not going to take you through all iterations. I'll let you know where there were a lot of them, but it's never just a straight once and done. There's always a lot of fidgeting and fussing and nudging back and forth. One of the things to keep in mind if you're working with geospatial, or if you haven't worked with geospatial before, is that you're going to be working primarily with a shape file, which is a .shp. And you read it in with a read OGR, which is from the rgdal package. However, it's important to know that whenever you download, at least in the geospatial data in Buffalo Open Data, when you download a file, you get not just the shape file, but you get siblings. You get an SHX, I think that is, and a PRJ and a DBF. I don't know what those mean. I just know they all come together. And if you don't have them all together next door to each other, the read OGR will fail. So whatever you, however you are uploading your data, you need to make sure you have that family of files, even though you're going to be working with the SHP, the shape file. So I uploaded my bike data and my park data, and I also uploaded the neighborhood data. And then I used the broom package to tidy up my polygons. So I needed to tidy up the parks data, and I needed to tidy up my bikes, even though those weren't polygons, those were lines. And then, of course, my neighborhoods. And that's called fortifying. With that data all fortified, I was able to generate my first basic plot. So it was simply a ggplot with a geom polygon, and I have got very, very limited options filled in here because I just wanted to give you the basic look at how it started. And we have the geopolygon for the parks, the hoods, and then the bikes. So the way it works in ggplot with with the mapping data is it comes in layers. So you have the hoods are laid down first, or the neighborhoods, and then the parks are laid on top of that, and then the bike trails are laid on top of that. And that brings me to the first chart. And of course, I'm so excited when it actually works. And when I ran it by my trusted tester who shares my home office, the enthusiasm wasn't as strong as mine because there wasn't enough context. So I had to go back to the drawing board and tidy it up and clean out some of the clutter to make it have more information density. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use theme void and get rid of this background. I really don't need the latitude and the longitude on the map. This is not like anybody's going to be using a map for navigating, so I can get rid of that. Plus, this dark background doesn't contribute to the efficiency or effectiveness of the map. So I simply remove the background with theme void. I added that at the end. And then we end up with this very similar map, but with less clutter. So the next thing I want to do is add some labels, because labels are helpful. In order to do that, I needed to find the centroid of the polygons for the neighborhoods. And we created that by just using this function gcentroid, and then we turned it into a data frame that pulled out the coordinates, and from that I just had to do some changing of the names and added the centroid to the ggplot so that I could put labels for the neighborhood. The problem with this was that I had overplotting, and this is an area where I went through several iterations to try to solve this, and there wasn't a real easy solve. I had to code it. So we'll look at that in a moment, but there's a couple of places here where it's hard to read the plots or the neighborhood names because they're so close and they're overplotted. So the next thing I did was I fussed with it and found out what new latitudes and longitudes would make sense for those areas that were overplotting. So I just created new latitudes for those specific neighborhoods. So if the neighborhood was Black Rock, they got this latitude. If it was the Elmwood Bidwell and so forth, Delvin Grider. And I played with those back and forth until I was sure that there was no more overplotting. And you can see up here, here's Black Rock. It was overplotting before with Grant Amherst, and now they're separate. So that's how I cleaned up the labels for the map using the centroids. So next, because Lake Erie is such an important part of this geography, I really thought it was important to add it to the map. And I created actually a polygon, which is, this is a geospatial file here that has the latitude and longitude. It's really just a square rectangle at the back of this. And I added it to the top of the ggplot because it's in the layering, it will go on the bottom. And then we put your neighborhoods on top of that, and then the parks on top of neighborhoods, and the bikes on top of the parks. So we added Lake Erie, and that gives you a sense of context. And then it was time to think about color. As I mentioned before, we're back at the Adobe color.adobe. And first I went in to choose a palette, and I had fooled around with a little bit of color in this to see how did green look for the parks. And I knew I wanted, a fresh, bright green. Get into here. Sorry about that. So I knew I wanted a fresh, bright green because I knew it would stand out. And the color palette that looked like it was going to work, we'll get here in just a minute. Okay, here we go. So I had a good feeling that this was going to be accessible, and I liked that one bright green. So I selected that, and it's hard to see on this chart, but if you go into color.adobe.com, you can go into a command here that says edit, and that'll bring you to this screen on the lower left. And then you can click the accessibility checker, and it will tell you if it's accessible or not. So I felt good that I selected a good palette there. And the last thing I wanted to do was identify a gradient for this darker brown that would be useful for coloring the neighborhood. So I went to the HTML color picker, which is a great tool, and you type in your hex code for the color that you are referencing, and it generates the gradients and the hex codes that go with that. So these are some very powerful tools and really helpful in getting to a color palette that I was happy with and I thought worked well on this map. So here's the map. The syntax highlights are here with the fills added for each of the geoms, and in some cases I did have lines as well, or color in for the neighborhoods. I had a color that was a little different than this fill. So the next thing I need to do, and I'll note right here, I'm not sure why this happened, but my bike trails, which in the previous chart were black, disappeared. I'm not sure why, but they'll come back in a moment. It had something to do with adding the theme void. I'm not really sure what the problem was. And then the next thing I'll add is the annotations, which provide additional information. Instead, I use this instead of a legend. The legends force the eye to move from the thing that you're like, for example, the name of or a park. If I had a legend that is taking up space, it also makes the eye go back and forth. It's better to label the item without a legend directly. So down here I have park and my bike lane. There is a bike lane here, but it doesn't show up in this ggplot. Put the labels and annotation next to the item that you're trying to label, so it's more easy to connect it to what it's trying to label. Down here, I added like Erie as well for context. And we're almost done with this chart. And the last step is to add meaningful titles, subtitles, and captions, and fix all my coordinates. So this is how we get to the final product, just adding the titles down here at the bottom. My bike trails are back. I've got Lake Erie, I've got parks, I've got my neighborhoods. They're not running into each other. I'm pretty happy. But there's one more thing that I need to do. That one more thing is I need to test, is it colorblind friendly? I think it is because I selected an accessible palette to begin with, but let's double check. I went up to the Coblis website and I ran this through every simulator. In the next slide, I'll show you side by side how it compares. So we'll start up here on the left. This is a red week. Color blindness, this is green week, and that's blue week. This is red colorblind, blue colorblind, or I'm sorry, green colorblind and blue colorblind. It's working no matter what. This is monochromatic, and this is a blue cone monochromatic. So I was satisfied that the execution was working across all testable levels of color blindness. And so I considered myself done with this plot. On the left is where we started, on the right is where it ended up. So we've talked about now, what is universal design? Why does it matter? What tools can you use to get started? You've seen a quick little demo of how I use those tools to build this map on the right. I'll give you a few resources if you're interested that you might want to consider looking into. I myself am very interested in learning more about WCAG, and if you are interested, you can check out the BBC has a great blog and lots of resources to learn about how to make your design accessible. In addition, oops, I think let me go back here really quick. There's some others here. The GSA, the US General Services Agency, also has incredible resources to describe what accessibility is and how to think about it and how to get started. WCAG is, like I mentioned before, has extensive specifications to consider. And finally, if you are interested, the Department of Homeland Security in the US has a trusted tester certification available. It's a self-administered 90-day program, and it's free. And if that's something that you wanted to add to your portfolio, it's certainly something to consider. I myself am actually going to look into this. I have a few things I have to wrap up before I can do that, but probably by June, I'll start working on certification as a trusted tester. Now, RStudio and R both have made some great strides in accessibility. And if you're interested in looking into that, there's a blog that reviews the accessibility features in RStudio. In addition, there is a blind R users group that you can connect with. And there's actually a lot of conversation taking place there. I spoke with Jonathan Godfrey, who runs the group, just this week, and he has believed and considers R one of the best statistical software packages for accessibility. And there is room to improve, of course, and definitely the Markdown format is helping a lot and making the content more accessible. So finally, if you're interested in some data storytelling resources, I mentioned the Storytelling with Data podcast by Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflick, and she's got this great book I would recommend. And then the cartography book from Kenneth Field is just released, and I can't wait to get my hands on that. So thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my work with you and to talk about accessibility. And Kevin, I think that wraps it up for me.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Hi, folks. If you have any questions, you can ask them there in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. But first off, actually, a question from myself, Regis. Tell us a bit about your career as a data scientist and analytics and stuff like that.
Sure. I started my career with an education in statistics. I have an undergraduate degree in statistics, and I have a master's degree, an MBA in operations research. I've worked in logistics, and I transitioned early in my career to marketing research, and was responsible for generating and collecting data, or developing questionnaires and doing quantitative and qualitative research for many years. And my last corporate job was with Fisher Price. I worked in the toy business in charge of the marketing research department there, and had the opportunity to set up my own business and focus in on what I really love to do, which is data visualization. So when I launched out on my own, I decided I needed to retool my skill set, and had been following Nathan Yao's blog about flowing data, where he strongly recommends using R. So I went through a 10-course specialization on Coursera with Johns Hopkins. It was fabulous. It was really rigorous. It was tough, and I loved it, and came out of that and have been working with R and with other data visualization packages for the past 6 years.
Okay, tell me, when did you discover R? When did R become part of your work? Because presumably as a statistician, you might have used other things previously, like SAS or SPSS,
yes.
maybe.
Yes. I used all those, way back when we used Minitab, and we used SPSS. We used SAS, not as much, but I didn't really start using R until I didn't become aware of R until I started looking into data visualization, and that was in the early teens of 2010, 11, and so forth. And that's when R hit my radar. So I picked it up rather late. We didn't use it corporately in where I was working. We had other avenues of. We actually hired out a lot of the analysis at that level.
What was your first impressions of R? Like, how did you find learning it? It
was tough. Yeah. I didn't. It was tough for me, and I didn't quite understand a lot of what I was going through. So it was a long road to get to the data viz side of it. It was a long road, but I'm happy for it, and now I love it. I like to work with R. I get a little frustrated sometimes when things don't work, and I don't know why, because I'm a data viz person, so I don't really understand what's going on under the hood a lot of the time, but I know there's a solution, and maybe if I just come back later, it'll fix itself, or if I turn off the machine, that works sometimes too. So
Good stuff.
patience, I think. Yeah.
So if you started about the early teens, that was like about 10 years ago, that was still very much the era of base R. What has happened since is that I think ggplot was around at the time, but not very well known. And this was a few years before tidyverse. Well, I feel that tidyverse has sort of made it easier to use R for if you're new. But at the time, it was base R is a higher hurdle to jump, I think, for a beginner. What was your impressions like that?
Yeah, it was tough. I didn't pick up ggplot at first. I used the base R data viz options, and I thought ggplot was a little bit of a hurdle to get over, and it took a little bit of time. But at once again, can get into the tidy way of thinking and the tidyverse program, and it works out really nice. So I appreciate it, and I really like it now, and I opt to use it.
Good stuff. Just actually, from you were working in a corporate environment at the time. I think R was very much still based in the universities. So what was your let's say your companies, your colleagues, what was their sort of interpretation of R, or was it something you discussed with them? Or
yeah, when I would hire young analysts, or new analysts, I guess I should say, I always quizzed them on what their experience with R was, and they often said, yeah, I know it, I know of it, but they hadn't worked with it at that point. So R really wasn't on anybody's radar in my work environment. And honestly, if we did anything, it was with it had to be with SPSS and with Excel. Yeah.
Good stuff. And just actually, you're based in Buffalo, as you sort of said at the start. It's 6 hours west of New York. I feel that a lot of the big R communities are based in the large cities like London, New York, San Francisco. So is it easy for you to interact with your fellow R users as peers, particularly in 2010, before Twitter was a thing, even or social media?
Yeah. Well, we have here an incredible R community with the Roswell Park Cancer Research Institute is R based. And there's an incredible number of people who are really doing very complicated things in R. And we've had an R ladies group, and we've had an R user group meeting from time to time here. And I have made some good connections with people locally.
Good stuff, yeah. And just moving forward to accessibility, you raised some very interesting items there. Just to sort of from a career young data scientist with regard to accessibility in their overall workflow, what sort of as well, in addition to the things like looking up the WCAG, but just actually from the point of view of very basic things in their workflow, what would you sort of recommend that look out for?
It's great. I'm so glad you asked that question. I think it's incredibly important to start at the beginning thinking of accessibility. It is a whole lot easier to design it in as you begin your project than to try to retrofit. It's almost impossible. So start early and reach out and find out what the scope of the exposure is. Are you working for a government contractor? Are you working for a government project? That if you are, that definitely increases the importance of building in these techniques. I would highly recommend looking at the U.S. General Services Administration videos. They're 4 minutes. They'll give you incredible detail on how to specific things that you can do right away. And it's really thinking about the user experience and designing in the best user experience. And keep in mind that it's very easy as a designer to fall in love with your own design, like that first map I made, but the user is not, they don't have all the ins and outs that you have, and they're looking at it with fresh eyes. And that's a hard thing to do. So you can get other people's opinions of your work. If you have a trusted advisor that you can show your work to get feedback on what they see or what they don't see, that helps. But if you really have to get out of your own eyes and try to look at something from someone else's eyes and follow some of those basic steps.
Good stuff. I feel like the conversation about accessibility is very new. That like up until let's say 2 or 3 years ago, people weren't very conscious of it. Like when they're running events or anything like that. Or is that am I wrong about that, or is it like has it been like at a corporate level, people being more conscious of it all along, and people like me just catching up lately?
I feel like I'm just catching up. I come from a place where the people I worked on products for people who couldn't speak and they couldn't walk and they couldn't go to the bathroom themselves because they were all children. But
Yeah.
I was very aware of accessibility from that perspective, but it wasn't called accessibility because it was a user experience. Accessibility stretches that to other sorts of user issues. And I think personally, I've only myself encountered it. I would say a few months ago, I got a proposal for a project, or a request for a proposal for a project that asked for WCAG 508 compliance. And that's what sent me on my journey to say, well, I make large font and I use colorblind friendly palettes. Yeah, I can do that. And then I realized it's way beyond having large fonts, and it's really and that's why it talks so much about that formatting consistently with the CSS and the HTML code and using Markdown. That's the most powerful way to incorporate it into your work, and you don't have to think about it. Use the system. And I think that's you asked for advice. I would say use the system, use what these smart people at our studio and that are developing all of this software have put into that, because they're working on it and they're really smart, and
Good stuff.
It'll just make it easier for you.
That's great. I believe that our studio has sort of incorporated alt text, or about to incorporate alt text into our Markdown. Or I didn't think that was just in the last day or two. Just actually on the quickly, this is sort of my own question really with regard to alt text. For example, Twitter would allow you to have 1,000 characters. LinkedIn would only allow you to have 120. So almost on Twitter, you can almost write an essay in the alt text. Really, the question is, how much is too much? Should you just keep it simple or straight to the point, or should you be as descriptive as possible?
For me, I think, when I'm from a data viz point of view, I think you really need like at least 9 sentences when I write an alt text for a data viz, because why are you having a data viz if you can't describe it? And if you can't describe it, then it might as well just be a cartoon on the page. So I think it's important to have a description of what's on the x-axis, what's on the y-axis, what are the units of measure, what are the increments, what are you observing in the chart, what's the title of the chart. So there's 6 sentences there. It depends on what's going on in your chart. If you have a scatter plot with an overlaid linear model, that's another sentence. I think, personally, for data viz, I think you should go all out. But
So it's a sort of, it feels like a lot of work, but as you said, if you're not doing it, you're not doing it right. So pretty much what you're getting at. So
what's a lot of work though? I mean, if you made a chart, you can describe that chart. It's maybe, really, it's 4 minutes, if that, for a chart to write the description. Sorry.
That's sorry. It's just actually the thing here is it froze up in me. Just actually, what was your sort of, just with regard to data visualization in beyond ggplot? What sort of things are you looking at with R packages? Is there anything else that catches your eye, like with regard to some interesting ideas with what's going on with R and data visualization?
Sure. I recently been doing some work with ggiraffe, which is a network visualization that's built along the lines of ggplot. So the syntax is very similar. If you know ggplot, you can easily get into ggiraph and work through the details of network graphing. And I've also been working with the dashboards using Shiny. So Shiny dashboards and Flex dashboards as well. So pulling those data viz into a more summary type of experience.
Good stuff. Tell me, what sort of stuff would you like to do now in the future going forward? What sort of ambitions have you as an R user, let's say over the next 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I want to continue to polish up some modeling skills, and I am very interested in the next few weeks. I think my next project is going to be some text analytics, doing some work with Gutenberg R.
Okay. Good stuff. And just sort of switching over now, this is interview has been recorded in late April 2021. I'm in Ireland and we're still dealing with the COVID crisis. Just actually, I know that in India, where a lot of our friends are, that there's also it's getting very serious now. So just actually the question really is, how has that affected you as a data scientist and an R user, and how over the last year, how have you been coping with that?
So I work from home anyway, so working from home has not been a problem. In fact, I think because of the transition to the online environment, it's opened up a lot more events and activities. For example, this whole YR Foundation series, I've been to conferences that I probably wouldn't have attended. I'm attending one on Friday and Saturday. If you all are interested, there's a great conference being run out of Rochester, New York with the American Statistical Association called UPSTAT, UPSTAT. It's open to all if you're interested. But I've also attended user groups in other cities, and I would say it's a side effect of the COVID is that it's given me access to even more people and more events.
Good stuff. I'll just see if we have any questions left there in the chat. Not a whole lot. I think we sort of worked through all our questions there. So I think we'll leave it there, actually. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And hopefully you will be seeing you again in, like, as you sort of said, in more virtual events and our user groups events, and hopefully more follow-up talks and stuff like that. But I think we'll actually leave it there, folks. Thanks very much for joining us. Just again, to thank our sponsors, Jumping Rivers, and again, thanks, Regis. Oh, sorry, actually, just a sort of quick question is if people want to reach out to you, what's a good way for them to reach out to you for, one-to-one basis? Are you?
Sure. I am on LinkedIn at Regis O'Connor, and my Twitter handle is at Regis O'Connor. And those are the two best places to find me.
Excellent. So just to sort of reach out and find out more about the work you're doing. Okay, folks, I think we'll leave it there. Hopefully see you again very soon. YR have a webinar this time next week, Thursday, 29th of April at 6 p.m. UTC, where we're joined by Jonathan Ruger, who's going to be talking about analyzing volcanoes. So hopefully we'll all see you there next week. That sounds very interesting. I love the sort of the broad spread of applications that R is used for. So that's great. Folks, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. And we'll hopefully see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So now, that was great.
Oh, gee.